All right, today I wanted to do a specification comparison between the Mavic 3T and the Matrice 30T. I'm going to cover the major components and differences and practical features from the aspect of search and rescue, deer recovery, and other wildlife usage and some law enforcement related application. I will not cover common or non-critical features. I also need to clarify, I've never flown the M30T. I'm looking at this purely to help you look at the differences, understand how they affect these, potential usage environments, and from my experience as a Mavic 3T pilot. So the major differences, obviously, the aircraft's a lot bigger. You do have a wider temperature range of usability or operating temperature range. With the 30T, we get a ingress protection rating on the 30T, and that second 5 in the ingress, the first 5 is the dust ingress, the second 5 is moisture. So you got protection against low pressure jets of water from all directions. Limited ingress is permitted. You get higher wind handling capability. The altitude, Mavic 3T out of the box has a little bit of an advantage, but again, that's 6,000 meters above sea level, so that's pretty high. If you want to go higher, so you 5,000 with the Matrice 30T. If you want to go higher, there are high altitude props available, which would allow you to go up to 7,000 meters ASL. With the Matrice 30T, you have the RTK receiver built in. And then from looking at your payloads, your PSDK port has a higher voltage based on the 6S battery of the 30T versus a 4S on the 3T. So you have a higher voltage at the port, which theoretically means you could develop or developers could develop higher output payloads. So the M30T can handle harsher weather, carry larger, heavier, higher output payloads. So for the camera payload, you have half-inch CMOS sensors, 48 megapixel on the wide angle for the 3T, 12 megapixel on the zoom, and the opposite on the 32, you have the 48 megapixel on the zoom. 7 times optical, 56 times total zoom on the 3T. We do see a increasingly blurred picture up to 7x, and then the visible transition at 7x, and then it clears up really nicely after that, and of course starts to blur again in the higher magnifications. The 30T has 5 to 16, so dynamic optical, 200x total optical plus hybrid or plus digital. There is a visual transition at the 5x, but it is noticeably better than the 3T, and I'm going by my real-world experience with the 3T versus the videos I've seen of the 30T. So it's a little nicer there, of course. Does it affect us if we're identifying deer, gender of the deer from a distance at 15 to 20 times zoom? Those differences don't really matter to us. And also, if you're in deer recovery, dead deer don't really care how close you are or the noise. So if you have the 3T or the 30T, it doesn't really matter. Where that higher zoom is going to really come into play is if you want to be a longer distance from your subject, if you don't want to expose them to the noise, maybe you have more sensitive species, or you're in law enforcement and you don't want to give away your position to a suspect that's being watched, things like that. If you want National Geographic level footage, you're going to want a drone and payload made for that job. Neither of these are intended to be photographer or videographer drones per se. And you can watch some of my other videos to get an idea of how close I can get to deer and their behavior in response to that. I think it comes into or comes down to how you approach your subjects in a lot of cases with wildlife. Yeah, okay. So the other thing is these, as I said, they're not really photographer or videographer drones, so there's no RAW format in your image output, and there's no mechanical shutter, which kind of limits your speed in mapping applications. So looking back at the comparison, the thermal's the same. You get a FPV camera with night vision on the 30T. This makes, flying with night vision. This makes flying in low light environments, or when your main camera payload is facing down at the ground and you're looking for, a search and rescue. This is helpful in where you're in steep terrain or around obstacles. You also get a laser rangefinder on the 30T, which we'll talk about. That's going to help you set pins more accurately and from a distance. So the M30T has higher zoom capability, and the FPV camera makes for better awareness during searches in steep terrain or around obstacle-laden environments. Sorry, I'm having to get used to how the mouse works with this recording. All right, so the flight controller. You get the extended temperature ranges. You got a larger screen on the RC Plus. There is an ingress protection rating, and that 4 is protection against water splash from all directions. Limited ingress permitted. We get about equal internal battery operating time, and then the 30T or the RC Plus has the external battery that can be added and extends the time up to 6 hours. And then, of course, it's hot swappable. If you wanted extended time on your 3T controller, you could always use a battery bank to extend that. So the M30T, and then you also have the dual controller option with the 30T, which in combination with the FPV camera could give you a little more flexibility in certain situations. So the M30T has the larger screen, the extended temperature range, external battery for convenient extended operation time. So flight time, the ratings are 45 minutes flying and 38 minutes hovering from DJI for the 3T. That's 41 minutes and 36 minutes for the 30T. I did a test of hover time for comparison. With the 3T, was 30 minutes of hovering. That was with 1 to 2 miles per hour of just kind of varying wind. It was 28 minutes with the JZT-30 Spotlight payload. So I suspect the Matrice is going to, or the Matrice 30T is going to give you about 28 to 30 minutes on a battery, and that's without a payload. The hot swappable battery, it's minimal advantage. I can get my 3T landed on the ground and the battery swapped in about 45 to 50 seconds if I'm pushing it. Now, I would argue, what's the point of that? There's no real scenario unless it is a fleeing suspect in a law enforcement type scenario where that little bit of time would be that critical. So take that with a grain of salt, that hot swappable batteries and whether that's a true advantage. All right, so from a portability standpoint, I tried to put together what I could find about the masses and the sizes of the cases with the drone and batteries and loaded up, So my 3T, and I've got 6 extra batteries, 1 in the drone, so 7 total. I think that works out to be 3.5 hours of flight time. Yeah, that's right. So with all that in my case, I'm at about 6.4 kilograms. You can see the case size here. I can fit that in an underfloor compartment in my sport utility vehicle, so I can conceal this thing pretty good. I don't have to worry quite so much that someone's going to look into the car and see something. That's a big issue for me, even with tinted windows. Now, if you've got more space to work with, if you've got a trunk in a car, or if you've got a secured area in the back of your truck, that would be good. Personally, I would feel uncomfortable with $20,000 worth of Matrice 30T and equipment in the back of my car all the time, but I could run around with the 3T in the back of my car concealed and feel relatively comfortable. So the Matrice 30T, obviously you've got the 2 boxes potentially. You've got the main box, which holds the drone with 2 batteries installed, 4 extra batteries. With everything fully loaded, it's going to be 12.5 kilograms, and you can see it's fairly large, obviously. And then the second box is the BS30 power station, or battery charging station. Holds up to 8 batteries. A lot of people will carry a generator or a power station so they can charge on the go, but in this case, you really don't need it. You don't have to have it, right? You could have the generator or the power station, but you don't have to have it. You could just carry the BS30 battery charging station as a carrying case for your extra batteries. And that's going to be about 10 kilograms fully loaded with batteries. And then there's another, I just found a random kind of case available for the 30T online from GPC. It holds the drone and 2 controllers instead of just the one of the DJI box. Holds 6 extra batteries, and then of course with the aircraft, 6 batteries, 2 controllers. Or sorry, that's not even counting the 2 controllers. That's just the aircraft. You're looking at approaching 16.5 and probably upwards of 18 kilograms once you have everything, loaded up. So just keep that in for perspective. So the M3T has nearly the same levels of performance, but is much more easily portable. So that's going to make the main advantages for the M30T. So the zoom 200x versus 56x. Now, dead deer don't care how close you are. If you're looking for noise sensitive application, or if you're in a noise sensitive application, you might need to be further away from your subject, such as in law enforcement, if you're staking out somebody. Pins, the laser rangefinder really makes setting pins from a distance a little bit nicer. So you zoom in on that deer or that cluster of deer, you set a pin, you don't have to fly over them like you would with the M3T, where you would need to be directly over them to set that pin, or you would set from the map view, which obviously will be a lot less accurate. When I'm setting pins, I don't set a pin for every single deer. I set a pin in a group of deer. I mark the pin with the number of deer that I see, or I mark it in my written notes, or I come back to the video and, if you will, transcribe it later. Looking at my notes here. So the FPV camera is nice, but it's only going to be valuable or necessary in extremely rugged terrain or obstacle-laden environments where, for instance, if you're in the city and there's buildings or antennas or towers and you have to fly there, and just a single look around with the main camera isn't going to be enough to protect you. And of course, you don't want to rely on your obstacle avoidance necessarily. So the environmental, the M30T has an IP rating for the moisture, precipitation, wider temp range. The value of this is going to be highly dependent on your specific location and your climate. Most M30T pilots, and this is just from watching their videos online, will tell you that this is important if you get caught out in a shower, but the effect to visibility of the cameras is such that it will impair your searches. The M30T has 3-prop landing. Now I've watched a video of how this works and read the description in the manual, and this is like a controlled crash, if you will. You might save the main body of the drone, but you know, that's the main goal of this method, is to just minimize the damage. Smart Track, you can watch a video online about how the Smart Track works. Basically, this is the zoom camera following your subject, and you still have to manually fly the drone and operate the controls to follow the subject, but the camera can effectively lock on to that subject. And the weight of these advantages, like I said, depends on your usage and environment. So pricing comparison, initially I'm going to show with the old pricing. There was a price drop, and this was the pricing that I used to make my decision originally. So I outfitted both of these kind of comparison setups with 2 hours of flight time worth of batteries. So the Mavic 3 comes with one battery, and then I bought I outfitted this kit. I ended up with two of these, but I outfitted this kit with a battery kit that has 3 individual batteries. So that's going to give me about 2 hours of usable flight time. And then again, that's based on 30 minutes per battery of real flight time, and that's based on my testing. And all of my real world flights, I can look back at those records and see that I'm in the 28 to 32 range, and I'm coming home with reasonable reserve, so I'm not risking the aircraft every single time I fly, and I'm getting consistent 28 to 32, just depending on the conditions. And of course, I outfitted the searchlight for the JCT30, putting us at 6707. Of course, I bought more batteries and accessories, so of course I'm higher than that, but this kind of gets you in the ballpark, or gets you in the initial good setup. So going to the 30T, comes with two batteries, and then if we outfit that with 6 more for a total of 2 hours of flight time, and then we're going to get I got 0 of the Crystal Sky WB37 batteries. I've got that listed as 0, but that was in my original, what I would have bought to extend my flight time. But just so that these are even, we've got 3 hours of flight time on our controller, 2 hours of flight time on our aircraft. And then of course the speaker searchlight, the CZI LP12. Originally, I think I saw these for $1,500, but I put this at $2,000 because that's kind of where I'm seeing them listed today. So you're at $17,973. And again, most M30T users will utilize the included battery charging station and an AC power source. So that's going to cost extra for the generator or the portable power source. And you might not need as many batteries, but I would argue you'd still want to have 3 full sets, maybe 4, even if you're using that charging station. And I think that's what most people are going to set up for. So going to the next slide, we had a price drop on the M30T from $13,999 to $96.37, and that's in US dollars. So obviously now, instead of being, let me back up, maybe 2.5 times, now we are only twice as expensive. So obviously that's going to factor into our decision. That is a big difference, right? So now if we go down to this next slide, this is a decision analysis, and what we do here, if you've never done this, is you look at 2 options, and you weight the features or what these options give you towards your goal, and you weight, the best one might get your max score, and the second best one might get some portion of that based on how that's going to affect your usage of this piece of equipment. And I use these in my engineering job to make a decision on a major piece of equipment. So anyway, for this one, I encourage you to do this on your own, and you could rescore these on your own based on your usage. Now, I'm going to just I'll go ahead and just kind of spell this out. So I live in the Southeast U.S. Precipitation, we might have days of precipitation, but there's always a break. It's never such that I would have to design or I would have to choose a piece of equipment that has to be able to fly in the rain or could at any moment be rained on. So if you live in potentially, you know, drier climates or just more, what's the word, temperate, then you could argue that the M3T would work just fine. But if you live in maybe the Pacific Northwest, or you live somewhere where every day it rains and the weather is even less predictable than, you know, where I live, or you get a lot of snow, that type of thing, then you might want to go with the 30T based on that. So anyway, I encourage you to do this type of decision analysis for yourself. I'm going to give you what I got. And again, temperature, wind, precipitation, ambient noise, right? So the noise that might cover up the drone noise, that being wind, noise in a, you know, an urban environment or something like that, or subject noise sensitivity. So if we're looking at deer or we're looking at some very sensitive, you know, species or something that we're trying to track down, then you're going to have to consider, you know, the M3T might make too much noise for you to get a look at these animals, right? You might need to be farther away and be able to still watch them, observe them. And then also your transportation is going to matter. If you have a small SUV and no private area that you can store this thing, then it's going to be hard for you to feel comfortable with, you know, the Matrice 30T setup in your, you know, in the back of your car, your hatchback or whatever. So for aircraft, the M3T gets an 8 due to no IP rating, narrower temperature range. Again, if you're in the Pacific Northwest, where or in Scotland or England, or, you know, places where it's always going to rain and it's always gloomy and whatever, where that's just a risk, then this weight might be different for you. I've weighted it as such. For camera, I did -2 on the zoom camera, but you could score this worse if you need to be farther from your subject. For me, I'm looking at deer in the 10 to 20 range. Usually I'm close enough to them that I don't scare them, but I'm far enough away that I don't scare them and startle them, but I'm also close enough that 10 to 20 works and I get a good picture and I can make some nice YouTube videos. And so this is how I scored it. The controller, again, for this, you might score differently if you're in law enforcement, because you don't want any drone noise to be perceivable to your suspect. And again, it depends on the noise cover that you have. But, you know, you score it how you see fit. The controller, everything's bigger and better with the RC Plus, so of course that gets a 10 versus an 8 I gave for the M3T. Flight time's about even. I haven't found any good information on YouTube or online about real flight time tests with the M30T, so I just had to use what I suspect would be the result. Comparable, might be a couple minutes shorter on the M30T versus the M3T. Again, portability, the M3T is more portable and the score would depend on your transportation. You could carry the M3T all the time, stowed away in, you know, out of sight, but the M30T, you would want to have transportation that is, you know, accommodating, if you will. And then of course price, the M3T is half the price, so It gets a 10 versus the 5 of the Matrice 30T. So he scored 62 total when you add all that up, 62 for both. So really complete. You should do the DA yourself. And you know, for me, the deciding factor at the time was the budget. This is my first getting into the thermal drone area, and I wanted to start small and upgrade later if I wanted to, or if, you know, if business is good or whatever. So I'm liking the M3T, and I think it works for me and for deer recovery, for surveying, hunting properties, finding deer, finding other wildlife, and I think for search and rescue it would work just fine. Again, I'm in the Southeast USA, so, you know, from an environmental standpoint and the IP rating and the temperature range, it would be rare that I would push the limits of the M3T, if ever. And so, you know, this is what I got out of mine. I hope this encourages you to look at this on your own, and I hope it helps you in your decision making. And hope you enjoy the video.